forum with the Democratic candidates for governor. Please take a moment and turn your cell phones to silent or turn them off, as well as anything else that might be. I want to start off with a little bit of thank yous, and please, no applause at this point. First, I want to thank our gubernatorial candidates, who you will have plenty of time to applaud later. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, audience. All of you who have taken time on a rainy evening to come and learn a little more about the people you want to vote for on the 26th of June. Thank you for doing that. I want to thank the WDC members who have made this possible, in particular, Forum Chair Lynn Olson and her committee. Can the committee please stand up? And we have other forum volunteers from some of the other organizations. Thank you. If you are watching the slides, you will see we have a number of promotion partners that have joined with us to publicize this event. Thank you. And please, if you are representing one of those organizations, please stand. Thank you. Finally, I know it is our custom to introduce every candidate who comes to any of our events. We're going to dispense with that tonight for time purposes. But if you are running for office, please stand and wait. Our goal in this forum is to provide you with a particular focus on policy issues and strategies through the lens of women and children. All women. Women of color, LGBTQ women, women with disabilities, immigrant women, low-income women, older women, all of whom face not only gender barriers, but other bias as well. When the Maryland Commission for Women held a listening tour a year ago, one recommendation that came out of the Montgomery County meeting was that we, the voters, ask all public officials to factor 4 questions into their decision-making process. Those questions are on the slide. Will the decision improve women's lives? Will it increase safety for women? Will it improve women's physical and mental health? And will it improve women's economic health? We told the candidates ahead of time that these 4 questions would help shape this evening's forum. But beyond this evening, each of you, we encourage you to ask these questions when you go to meet and greets, when you go to additional forums, when you communicate with the candidates. These are important issues, and we encourage you to communicate with elected officials at all levels about them now and in the future. Washington Post reporter Odetta Wiggins was to have moderated tonight's forum. She had to cancel at the last minute, but she recruited a very capable replacement. We are so lucky to have Robert McCarthy, Washington Post senior regional correspondent who covers government and politics in Greater Washington. He's a Montgomery County resident, a voter, a former Metro section, I guess a voter, somebody go vote. Okay. A former Metro section editor and a local news analyst every Friday morning on WAMU 88.5. We so appreciate his willingness to step in and also express special thanks to Alice Wilkerson, who brought him up to speed on WDC and our issues. And now I'm going to turn the mic over to you.
Thank you very much. I believe my mother was a member, my late mother was a member of the Women's Democratic Club. So it's a particular pleasure for me to be here this evening. Odetta Wiggins, who was supposed to be here, sends her regrets. So we're going to move right along here. The forum is on Facebook Live for all you people watching at home, and it may be viewed on the Women's Democratic Club website after tonight. In the interests of saving time and to avoid bland, meaningless statements by the candidates, there will be no opening statements. There will also be no closing statements. There will be, this is an exception, there will be a 30-second opportunity for each candidate to wrap up, clarify, or amplify answers to any of the questions at the end of all of the questions. That's not after each question, that's at the very end after we've been here for a while. I regret to say there are no audience questions being accepted this evening, but many of the questions are based on public input that was gathered previously through the registration survey. Most of the questions you'll be allowed 90 seconds to answer. The timekeeper will show signs, distinguished timekeepers in the front will show signs when 30 seconds is remaining, when 15 seconds is remaining, and then we'll flash a stop sign when time is up. And candidates may finish one sentence after time is called. And the moderator will enforce that. The moderator has been instructed to be assertive in enforcing time limits and also demanding specificity in answers and not bland, meaningless opening, which some politicians will want to do. If a candidate mentions another candidate by name, then the named candidate has 15 seconds to respond. Okay, so if you are named, you have 15 seconds to respond afterwards. The moderator, I may ask people for more information or explain the answer further, and I have been given, as I mentioned, very specific instructions to press for specific answers to the questions. And if I may say, I've been a moderator many, many times in debates, and I have never received such specific and seriously detailed advice on, and instructions on what questions to ask. I hardly have to do anything except read these questions which have already been given to me and sort of pay attention a little bit. I really credit the Women's Democratic Club for doing a lot of research and putting a lot of thought in advance into these questions. I'm not just blowing smoke there, I really mean that. So in order to save time, you will not applaud at any time during this debate except now for all the candidates. Now, the order will be, I will ask the question, and you'll each have a chance to respond. We're going to go from left to right, from your point of view, and we'll start obviously with Mr. Baker at the beginning, and then the next second question will start with Mr. Jealous, and then come back to Mr. Baker. That's how it's going to work. But first, I'd like to ask the candidates to introduce themselves by name, current office, and position. Mr. Baker.
Can you hear me? Yes. First of all, everybody turn on the mic. For Sherman Baker, I am the county executive currently of Prince George's County.
Ben Jealous, former national presidency of the NAACP, visiting professor at Princeton University, and an investor at Cape County.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Kevin Kamenitz. I'm the Baltimore County Executive, running with Valerie Urban, Montgomery County Councilwoman.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Rich Natalino. I'm a Montgomery County Senator, a Silver Spring native, I represent part of Silver Spring, and I'm running with LaWanda Jenkins from Baltimore County. He's right there.
Good evening, I'm Alec Ross. I'm the author of The Industries of the Future, a distinguished senior fellow at Johns Hopkins University, and running with Julie Marotti from right here in Silver Spring.
I'm Jim Shea. I'm the immediate past chair of the Venable Law Firm, and I'm running with Brandon Scott, who is here this evening. City Councilman Brandon Scott, in fact.
Y'all are not good at following rules, my kind of people. My name is Krish Vignaraja, former policy director to Mitchell, Alabama, and current full-time mom to my daughter, who is 10 months old. Her name is Alana.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll plunge right in. As I say, the questions have been skillfully drawn up by the Women's Democratic Club in advance. And question number one, which was the issue mentioned most frequently in the registrant survey, and we'll start with Mr. Baker and proceed down the row. What is the top environmental issue facing Maryland, and what is your plan to address it? And you have 60 seconds for this one.
For me, the top environmental issue is clean air and waste reduction. And so what I want to do is what we've done in Prince George's County, and that is to we're leading the state 3 years in a row in recycling and leading the state in waste reduction. So what I want to see is move to a 100% clean air, 100% waste reduction. So my plan that I put out for the environment takes us there, and that is to make sure we move away from coal, we move into energy efficiency.
Mr. Jones.
I think our goal, when I'm governor, our moonshot will be to move to be 100% reliant on clean and renewable energy as quickly as possible. It's an opportunity for us to create wealth, to create employment, to bring factories back to places that haven't seen them. And it's an opportunity for us to, frankly, lead this region. And Wayne Gretzky said he was a great hockey player because he skated to where the puck was going. Well, the puck in energy production is headed in only one direction. The faster we get there, the better chance we have not just to build a local economy, but a regional economy based here for the production of things like turf.
We have to save the Bay again. In Baltimore County, we're spending $26 million a year rebuilding eroding stream banks, planting trees, and even using street sweepers to stop runoff. But we also have to reduce our reliance on carbon fuels. In Baltimore County, we're putting solar panels on our closed landfills and county rooftops, reducing our carbon footprint and also saving taxpayer dollars and avoiding costs. We can show that we in Baltimore County save taxpayer dollars while also saving the environment.
Mr. Madaleno.
Climate change is the #1 environmental issue facing Maryland, facing our country, facing the world. Maryland has a special exposure to climate change. Rising sea levels will impact our coastlines, our extensive coastlines on the Atlantic and on the Bay. We have to find a way to stop that. We can do that in Maryland through increasing our renewable portfolio standard. I'm very proud of the work that I've done as a member of the General Assembly in order to get the number up to 25%. I was proud of the fact that we had to override Larry Hogan's veto just to get to 25%. So if we want to talk about 50 or 100, we're not going to get there with Larry Hogan in office, that's for sure. And we have to make sure that we have a broad-based engagement in the clean energy future, which is why the bill I led on had a component to make sure that there were jobs for Marylanders, there was assistance for Maryland companies, and it was focused at bringing new people into clean energy jobs, especially through the small minority of women-owned business communities.
I hate carbon fuels. I grew up in a coal country. Members of my family, members of my community died because of the spillover from the mines. We were destroying our environment. My top climate environment policy as governor will be to create the first statewide green bank. New York has done it, Connecticut has done it, Massachusetts has done it. In little old Connecticut, they created 13,000 jobs. And what this green bank will do, it will enable us to create the infrastructure to bring clean, renewable energy at scale into Maryland. Without it, we won't have a clean energy future. And it's going to take a measure of boldness and examples that we can follow from other states about how to set it up, and we will have a better future with the green bank here in Maryland.
Mr. Shea.
The move to renewable energy is critical, away from coal plants. But another major source of carbon emissions are automobiles. there are way, way too many of them for the roads that we have. I have a fully set forth comprehensive transportation plan online. I invite you to take a look at it, jimshea.com. It describes in detail the ways in which we will use mass transit, public transportation, to move our Marylanders around to their jobs, to their schools, to their place of worship, and to entertainment. Wherever they want to go, they need to go via mass transit. That means within the greater Washington area through the Purple Line and connections with the Metro, a fully sustainable Metro, connections that are reliable and fast between Washington and Baltimore, connections within the greater Baltimore area, and also public transportation on the Eastern Shore and Western Maryland.
Ms. Vignoraggio.
To me, the biggest problem is clean air and clean water. Maryland suffers the greatest number of deaths due to air pollution, which is why when it comes to clean energy, I want to first make sure we hit 50% clean energy by the end of my second term in 2026, on our way to 100% renewables by 2035. Second, I want to make sure we invest in leadership through RGGI and the Climate Alliance, because we cannot rely on Trump at the national level to take action. But I also want to make sure we are creating an economy in offshore wind and solar energy. When it comes to clean water, we are going to restore the Chesapeake Bay, but also the tributaries that feed into it, the Potomac and the Patapsco, the Choptank and the Nanticoke. But we're also going to address the fact that we need to work with farmers on sediment pollution that is running into the bay. And finally, we are going to work with industries like oysters, where we know that these are ways in which we protect sustainability, but also create well-paying jobs in Maryland.
Thank you. Those were pretty specific answers, and you all honored the time limit, so you're off to a great start. Now, question 2 is a different question on the same subject for each of you. We're looking for your views on gender equality. Now, each of you provided your views on gender equality for a WVAL TV voters guide. And I'm going to read the answer for each candidate, read the answer that was provided, and then ask a specific question about what you said to WVAL. I told you they really prepared this carefully, right? So we're starting with Mr. Jealous this time, and then proceeding down the list. So Mr. Jealous said, equality has been my life's work, whether it's helping to pass marriage equality in Maryland or working as a businessman investing in companies headed by women. I'll continue this work by ensuring gender diversity in all of my appointments. So the question is, how many woman-owned or woman-founded companies have you been involved in funding as a principal of Capor Capital? And how has this work informed your approach to ensuring gender diversity in all your appointments? And these are 60-second answers.
So at Capor Capital, we have 150 startups. 60+% of them, about 68% of them, have a Black, Latino, or female founder. Within that, about half of the companies have a female founder. I'm lead on 24 investments, including 4 in the state. And in my portfolio, half the ones in the state have women founders, and I believe half the ones in the, it just kind of runs through it. So about half female founders.
And how has this work informed your approach to ensuring gender diversity?
Well, you know, it's just really shown me that our goal in this state is too low. First, it's half women, it's half people of color, and our grand goal is to get to 29% inclusion of people of color owned and women-owned businesses. And when that's 75% of your state, it starts to look more like a cap than a grand goal. Our governor started a $200 million industry and gave all of the licenses, medical cannabis, all the licenses to white male-owned companies. It's just shameful. You know, our fastest growing company at Capor Capital these days is founded by an Afro-Dominicana. She's Black, she's Latino, and she's a she, and she's doing incredible work. We were her only investor for 4 years, and now everybody wants to be invested.
That's all the time we have. Thank you. Okay, Kevin Kamenetz, you said in the WBAL survey, executive appointments must reflect a commitment to represent our state's diversity and empowering all of our communities. So the question is, in looking at Baltimore County government, where you're the county executive, we see 18 department heads appointed by the county executive. 3 are women. How can you assure us you would improve that leadership ratio as governor, and how would you do that?
Well, actually, there are more than 3, so I disagree with that number. But let me tell you what I did when I became county executive. I recognized that we had to diversify the police and fire departments, the rank and files. And I'm particularly proud of the fact that our recruit classes have been 40% non-white male in both police and fire. We have so many female firefighters now. We are the largest percentage of female firefighters of any county our size in the country, and our number 2 fire chief is a woman. We've also worked hard to protect the rights of women. We set up a task force involving the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault, where we did an independent review of our rape cases in Baltimore County, and we changed the process where we have a sexual assault detective interview every victim. We helped lead the charge in Annapolis to pass the law that says no means no.
Thank you. Rich Madalino, you wrote, quote, "To fight sexual harassment and assault, I will establish a state commission on sexual harassment." So the questions are, would this be a funded priority for your administration? And can you tell us more about how you see the commission making a difference in the lives of Maryland women who face daily harassment?
I have to stand up because I'm so worried I'm going to hit Kevin with my hand gestures. So, I believe this commission should be an independent entity of state government. Look, part of my, I think, unparalleled experience up here is my experience with the state budget, with state government, and making sure that we have the funds, we have the organization necessary to get it done. My running mate, Luenda Jenkins, was the Special Secretary for Minority Affairs in the O'Malley administration, served as the leader of the state's small minority women-owned business program. Together, we would make sure that that commission had the resources necessary to both make sure women in state service and women seeking service from the state are not subjected to harassment, but have the state government be an example for other employers in the state of how to put out smart policies to fight harassment and how to be a leader and an example in our community for fighting harassment.
Thank you. Alec Ross, you wrote, "I promise that I will have a cabinet that is as diverse as this state. I would be a feminist governor." Question, by governing as a feminist, what are some of the specific state policy changes you would make to improve women's lives?
So for those of you who have your phones out, if you Google Alec Ross running for governor as a feminist, you will get the longer than 60-second answer to that. I would try to do what I did at the State Department working for Hillary Clinton. When you work for Hillary Clinton, you work for a woman, you work for a woman, you work with women, and you work on behalf of women. And the example that she set for me and my team at the State Department is the kind of thing that I would like to bring into the state of Maryland government, which is for every question, whether it's education, whether it's transportation, whether it's economic development, every single solitary question, every single solitary issue, you ask the question, what is the impact specifically on women? And if it is all disproportionately negative, what can you do to correct for it? So whatever the issue is, bring the gender dimension into it.
Thank you. Mr. Shea, you wrote, "I will have the most diverse cabinet in the history of our state that includes different genders, sexualities, and races, and women will play a key role on my transition team by advising on appointments and working with me to set my policy agenda." Question, can you tell us about your record in placing women in top positions? How many of your top campaign staff are women, for example?
So the last part of the question first, we have more women on our staff than men, so they're all through, up and down our staff. My record is long on having women advance. In the firm I ran for 22 years, there were many women in positions of authority, both lawyers and non-lawyers. In fact, so many that Network 2000, which is an organization for the advancement of women, particularly in business, gave us an award competing against all other businesses in the area, both law firms and otherwise. I have long learned that a diverse set of advisors makes me a better decision maker, makes the organization stronger, and I would certainly follow that routine as Governor of Maryland.
And Ms. Vignarajah. Oh, sorry. It's my cue, I forgot. You wrote, the only way to address gender equality in Maryland is to have more women in positions of leadership. I will appoint the first Maryland State Cabinet with more women than men. And the question is, how will that make a difference in state policies affecting women?
I really only have 60 seconds for this. The fact that 51% of Marylanders are women, and you see only 3 of Governor Hogan's leadership officials be women, is where you see this disparity. The fact that we come in 50th out of 50 when it comes to child care subsidies is a reflection of the fact that out of 14 federal and statewide offices in Maryland, so that's 8 congressmen, 2 senators, and the 4 statewide officials, none of those positions are filled by women. It is why we have less access to health care and elder care than neighboring states. It is why it will take us until 2034, until we have wage parity in Maryland, knowing that in Maryland, women get 84 cents to the dollar. And that's not even recognizing that it is much worse for women of color. And so for me, when I chose my running mate, Sharon Blake, there were a lot of people who said, you can't have 2 women on a ticket. I said, why not? I said, you certainly can't have 2 women of color on a ticket. I said, how many times have we had the other extreme? And look where we are.
Sharon Baker, you wrote, I believe that Maryland can be a national leader in moving towards gender equality. To achieve these goals, women have to be in positions of authority. So the question, it's a little long. According to the organization chart on the county executive's website, there are 9 positions that comprise your executive leadership team. 2 women, 6 men, 1 vacancy. If elected governor, would you put women in positions of authority in 50% of your leadership team, and would you require a similar standard of your leadership team as they select their own staff?
Well, just to correct it, that's probably like Kevin is, that we have many more. One of the things I found out when I became county executive over Prince George's County, it was a mess. And we were in crisis and free fall. So the first thing I did is somebody very smart to me, my wife, indicated I need to hire more women. So we did. Of the 29 agency directors, 16 are women. My top advisor, top government official is a female. Our DCO is a female. But more importantly, to make sure that we have a bench that are coming along and getting the experience. Our deputy directors throughout the county, we have 10 of them that are women. And they're not just they're in very critical, diverse positions, not just as the assistant fire chief, Homeland Security, health, in those areas that we make sure that there are opportunities throughout. But one of the things we have to look at, not just at the top level, but entry level, mid-management. Thank you.
Yeah, just very briefly, the question was, would you commit to put women in positions of authority in half your leadership team? Would you do that?
And we have done that, yes. And I did it now as a county executive. I do it as governor.
All right, so moving on to question 3, and Mr. Kamitz, we'll start with you. This is for everybody now, I've got 60 seconds to respond. What are the most cutting-edge, innovative programs and policies used in other states or countries that you would like to try here in Maryland? 60 seconds.
Okay, first of all, let me just go back because your statement before was incorrect, and I went on my website to make sure I clarified all our department heads. Almost half of our department heads are female, including 911, aging, animal services, corrections, elections, housing, planning, as well as the directors of our library, our public school system, and our community colleges. So we're fully committed in Baltimore County to the role of women and exercising leadership. I will tell you, one of the things I looked at in other countries was how we can better handle recycling of trash. So in Baltimore County, we own and operate our own recycling center, and it's so efficient, we actually take in other jurisdictions' trash, and we generate over $2 million back to our treasury. But we want to see how we can improve that process, and we visited other countries to do that. But we've also implemented technology changes in our police department and our public works to be more efficient and save taxpayer dollars.
I don't know if I would say this is cutting edge, but it's long overdue. We have to improve the way we connect our school system to career pathways. We need to improve career and technical education to give young people a view of where they're going in the future. It's a model that's used so effectively in countries like Switzerland and Germany. We should be trying to bring that in to our state. When you look at the Swiss model, the Swiss are a wealthy community, a diverse community linguistically, but one with high-tech industry. They help young people see themselves in the future. They link educational work to jobs, to career readiness, to college opportunities. That's what we have to bring, is that sort of sense of graduating from high school is more than just getting an attendance certificate that you survived 13 years. But it's actually something that says you are ready for the next step in your life, a career or college, and we're going to give you that lift in order to help you get there.
I began my career 24 years ago as a 6th grade teacher in West Baltimore. I taught at Booker T. Washington Middle School on the west side of Baltimore. Fell in love with and married a math teacher across the hall. And after the crisis in Parkland, after the shooting there, my wife Felicity and I started writing down the names of students who we taught, not students in our schools, but students who we personally taught who had been killed by guns. And we stopped when we got to 10. We just don't want to keep going. So one innovation that I am desperate to put in place in Maryland is smart grip technology. In the same way in which your iPhone can recognize if it's your thumb and only work if it's your thumb, so too is there technology where guns can only work if there is a biometric match with somebody who's gone through the clearance process to use it. I would love to bring smart grip technology and make sure it's mandatory on every gun in Maryland.
I spent many years as chair of the university system and many years on the Board of Regents. I was immersed in the education system, and I know now that the United States education system, particularly pre-K through 12, is in sorry shape. We need to look abroad to Singapore, to Finland, to Germany, to Shanghai, all of which have much, much more effective pre-K through 12 education systems than we do. I would borrow, and I have borrowed heavily from those practices. Take a look at my education plan online, jimshea.com. It's the Baltimore Sun called it a bold and comprehensive plan. And from early childhood education to better career track and path for teachers, for a principal pipeline, for assistance to areas of low income, and for a much stronger vocational system. All of these practices have been honed overseas, and we should put them into place here, and I will as governor.
So an example of what I would draw from other countries is paid family leave. I kicked off my campaign on my daughter's 3-month birthday. And the first policy I announced was making Maryland the first state in our nation to guarantee 3 months of paid family leave. America is the only developed democracy in the world that doesn't allow for it, which means we put our parents in the position of having to choose between taking care of their kids and putting food on the table. In terms of what I would draw from neighboring states, it's investing in universal pre-K for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. We know it is one of the best investments we make. For every dollar we invest, we get a $38 return. And right now, even in a state as affluent as Maryland, we know that many of our children start school and they are already far behind. If we actually invest in them now, we can guarantee that they will be on their ways to realizing their potential. As the only candidate here who is the product of Maryland Public Schools from kindergarten through 12th grade, this is an important issue to me.
Thank you. Like Chris, I would do paid family leave from around the country. I think that is a great idea, one that we should look at employing here. The other is, we've been working on this idea in the county called Transforming Neighborhoods Initiative. It actually takes some things that were done in New York using technology, innovation, but also tying all of the services around in the community. So whether it's tying education, healthcare, economic development, transportation, and all of those areas with each and every community and delivering the services holistically, neighborhood by neighborhood. It's something I would like to see expanded to scale. It has helped us in the county. I think it's something that we can do around the state, because you're not just focusing on one area, like education. You're focused on the things that impact it, like healthcare, the lack of housing, lack of jobs, lack of transportation, but doing it in real time with delivering services. And I think that's something that will help our state. Thank you.
I'm proud to be running for governor with Susie Turnbull, former chair of the Maryland Party. And one of the things that makes us different is we have the courage to say our country shouldn't be so different when it comes to healthcare. But we should learn from every other Western nation and finally pass state-based single-payer here. My conviction to do this was seared right in the hallway. A friend, I was talking to a bunch of home-based daycare providers who've endorsed our campaign. We're the only ones endorsed by the nurses in this state. And these home-based daycare providers lack health care. And then, to prove how universal it was, I walked out, and a man who's a white-collar professional came up to me crying because he heard me say that my life was saved because I had a seizure disorder as a kid. There was a public health care program that made sure that I didn't die. His girlfriend, 52-year-old professional, psychologist here in Montgomery County, world-renowned in her field, had died of an epileptic seizure 5 minutes earlier because she didn't have health care. When I'm governor, we will make sure that we move to single payer. The plan is at dental specialty.
I need to remind the candidates, please, to stick to the time limits, and please, I know you feel passionately about some of these issues, and I appreciate that, and that's what drives this whole process, but please, no applause. If we start applauding, it's going to eat up our time. We'll have less time to hear from the candidates how they're going to address the issues that matter so much to everyone. Okay, so now turning to education, and this was the second most mentioned topic in the survey of registrants. This is going to be, you'll have 90 seconds to respond to this one, which demonstrates the importance of education to the state and to this audience. The Kirwan Commission on Innovation and Excellence in Education recently released its analysis of Maryland schools and recommendations for improving our education system. So the question is, do you support all of the recommendations of the Kirwan Commission? If yes, how do you plan to implement them? And if not, what don't you agree with and why? And for the sake of people who haven't done as much homework as the Maryland Women's Democratic Club, I have a brief summary of what the Kirwan Commission concluded. And it is a 137-page report, so this is 2 paragraphs, just to help inform. The report began with a call to action, which stressed that despite a significant increase in state and local funding over the past 15 years, Maryland students still perform in the middle of the pack within the United States, which is in the middle of the pack compared to the rest of the world in education. And in order to compete with the best school systems, the report calls for Maryland to make a sustained statewide commitment to systematic change. And the Commission framed its recommendations around 5 policy goals. 1, improving early childhood education, increasing quality in teachers, having more pathways for college and career readiness, providing more resources for at-risk students, and more effective governance and accountability standards. So that's what we're asking you to respond to, and we'll be starting with Senator Matlino.
Thank you for that question. I'm the one person up here who is a member of the Kerwin Commission. I'm one of the 8 legislators who is on the commission. Before that, I served on a national task force that looked at these issues, and we brought those issues back to our state to, in fact, inform the work of the Kerwin Commission. If you want my plan for education, it is the Kerwin Commission, because I've invested the last 18 months of my life in getting it done. If you want to know why I'm running for this office, it is in order to be the governor that gets it done, because it's that important. And trust me, we will never get strong progress on public schools in our state with Larry Hogan as governor. Larry Hogan, who has embraced Betsy DeVos first and foremost of this administration at the federal level. We need a governor who makes public education #1. We have the most powerful governor in the country, most powerful when it comes to executive budgetary authority, appointing all the members of the school board and some of the local school boards, setting all the regulations. We need a governor who's going to push, prod, twist arms to get Kerwin done, because it is essential to the future of our economy. It is essential to the future of our young people. My last answer about what's cutting edge, I went back to career pathways, because that is one of the places we are falling down. But we have to figure it out, and we have a plan to how to start with the earliest children, strong pre-K, and then moving all the way through career and college readiness standards.
The way I'm able to stand in front of you today as a candidate for governor is because of a woman who my friends nicknamed Becky the Barbarian, my mother. And what she insisted on is that even though me, my brother, and my sister were growing up, going to public schools in coal country, that we were going to work hard, we were going to get a great education, and we'd be able to make it to college and have successful careers. And we made it. And I'm running for governor, recognizing the impact that education had on my life. Running as a former 6th grade teacher at Baltimore City Schools, married to a public school teacher, now in her 3rd decade teaching in Baltimore City Public Schools, with 3 kids of mine in Baltimore City Public Schools. I do identify with and support the recommendations in the Kerwin Commission. If there were one thing I were to segregate, it's career readiness. And I know we're in a room full of Democrats, and you're not supposed to criticize Democrats in a room full of Democrats. But I'll say this, I do find fault. I think that the rhetoric and policies of the Democratic Party for too long have been, you go to college and you're a winner, you don't go to college and you're a loser. And then we wonder, why is it that so many people who don't go to college, they vote for the Trumps, they get angry, they get disaffected. So I would really want to focus on pathways to economic well-being for people who may not be going to college. That is where I want to do all of the recommendations in the Kerwin Commission. That's where I would start.
I answered part of this question earlier as the chair of the university system. I was a great colleague and friend of Rick Kerwin, who's run the commission and authored a wonderful report. In January 2019, if I'm governor, I will have a full legislative package ready to go. It will include 2 major pieces. One, best practices that need to be adopted, and they run very similar to what's in the Kerwin Commission. And 2, a proper funding formula so that that can be accomplished. We can't do one or the other, we have to do both. Simply pouring more money into a system that is upside down is a bad idea. But without the funding, we can't accomplish the good practices and proposals that are both in my plan and in the Kerwin Commission report. Early childhood intervention, better career pathway for teachers so that they can flourish and be promoted and make more money without leaving the classroom. More principals training, a principal academy, more and better vocational training. I ran a business that had nearly 1,500 employees. I'm on many business groups. I'm also deep in the education world. I will challenge both of those groups to get together and make sure that the skills we're teaching our young people match the jobs that we have. There are many other specific proposals. They're in my plan, and I don't want to go over time.
just a quick follow-up question. What do you mean by the system's upside down, just briefly?
Well, what we do is we have a massive administration that tries to tell teachers what to do in the classroom.
It's top-heavy bureaucratic.
Top-heavy. We need to give the teachers the freedom and support to teach.
Okay, thank you.
I'm literally running for governor because of Maryland educators. I say that both as the daughter of 2 Baltimore City public school teachers. When my father retired last year, he was the oldest public school teacher in Maryland at the age of 80. It is also why I selected a lifelong teacher and former head of the Baltimore Teachers Union as my running mate. Education is my top issue. If I hadn't gotten the chance to go from Woodlawn High to the White House, I wouldn't have a chance to be standing here right now. And I know that it was thanks to teachers like Mr. Stoll, who sparked an interest in science that led me to study molecular biology at Yale, or Miss Efron, my English teacher, who introduced me to Shakespeare, and the saying that stays with me still today, though she be but little, she is fierce. I realize we have to institute policies, as the Kerwin Commission suggested, from cradle to career. Universal pre-K, fixing the funding inequities, rebuilding our crumbling schools, because I studied in those so-called temporary trailers that are still there today. Making sure that we are investing in science, technology, engineering, arts, math, financial literacy, civics education, because if we didn't, November 8th wouldn't have happened. But also making sure that when our kids come out of school, they are either career ready or college ready. Some kids are not going to go to college, and they have to have the technical and vocational training to get the trades jobs. But if they do want to go to college, I want to provide free community college and 1% student loans, because right now Maryland children come out with $30,000 in loans. That's not right.
Thank you. Like everyone else, we're going to say we're all for fully funding a current commission. I am too. You know, I've been working on this issue since I entered the legislature. My hair was black, and I was young and good looking at the time. And everybody I run into, I served on appropriations, so I know about money, but this is really about 3 things. And it's hard as heck to do. It's not a Democrat or Republican issue. It's about money. What are we willing to pay for our education across the state of public education? Not what we currently have. What are you willing to pay? Because when I ran for county executive, everybody said they were for education. Every politician. As soon as I offered a chance to raise our property taxes 15 cents to only go toward education, a lot of people weren't so sure. So one is about money and what we're willing to pay. The other is about wraparound services. We all agree what's in the current commission, but that done by itself will not move the needle. You have to talk about health care, you have to talk about jobs, you have to talk about housing, transportation, everything that goes to make it holistic, or it won't work. I can guarantee you, I'm in a struggling school system now, I can guarantee you it won't work there. 3, getting legislators that have the backbone to do what's right. That's easier said than done. That's easier said than done. Getting something passed out. If we want to change our change our education system, we have to be willing to have the courage to do it. It's not enough just to say it. It is a hard thing to do. We have to push it. Thank you.
I'm proud to be the one that the teachers trust to make sure that we fully fund our schools. I've been endorsed by 74,000 educators across 43 counties, and I want 85% of the vote, the endorsement. I don't know what percentage of that was in Montgomery County, but I'm proud to say that I had 100% of the educators in Prince George's County support my kid. What they know is that this is going to be hard. Getting our schools fully funded is going to be hard. And as a lifelong community organizer, I specialize in getting hard things done. I was named Marylander of the Year by the Baltimore Sun because in 1 year, I led the successful effort to abolish the death penalty in our state after the sitting governor himself tried not to.
Excuse me, the Kerwin Commission recommendations, please. Was the subject of the question.
I will get to it.
You're halfway through.
I appreciate that. You let everybody else finish before you clarify. Please extend
You
it.
weren't answering the question, sir.
I am doing this. All right. In 1 year. We don't get to do it I also that year co-chaired the campaign to pass the DREAM Act, put organizers on the ground to pass marriage equality. They said all of those would be impossible, and we got them done. And that's what matters here. If we want to have the opportunity to fully implement the Kerwin Commission report, we have to be able to lead the people of the state, not just the politicians, to build the will to get it done. And that's what I specialize in. I associate myself with all the comments about making sure we are ready for career and for college, making sure that our kids show up at pre-K and universal pre-K. I have 2 kids in the public schools myself. But what I know is somebody whose family's been in this fight since literally we walked out of slavery, is we don't get there unless we have a leader who can pull together the people of the state to get it done. Thank you.
Yeah, pardon me for interrupting you, but we are trying to get people to address the specific question, and just the other people said this. Do you support all of the recommendations of the Kerwin Commission?
I said I did, and that the only way to get it done is to lead the people of the state.
Thank you. So now we'll go on. Now we go to the lightning round.
Do I get an opportunity to answer?
I'm sorry, I thought you were.
Yes, you do, of course. It's a tough moderator.
Not that tough.
I don't want to catch him upset, so I just want to suggest how I didn't really get a chance to answer this question.
You have an opportunity now, sir.
Okay. So I do support the Kerwin recommendations. We obviously need to fully fund education, and that means making sure that casino money supplements the pot and doesn't supplant it. It also means, think about our state school system. 40% of our children come from families that are so financially insecure, they rely upon our schools to feed them breakfast and lunch. 20% of our toddlers in this state get no academic enrichment at home, and when they finally start their school career, they're already behind grade level. So universal pre-K makes sense. I made education a priority in Baltimore County with record investment in school construction, $1.3 billion to build or rebuild 90 schools. And we're doing great things in our classrooms in Baltimore County. We have a majority-minority school system in Baltimore County. We're not Baltimore City, it's a separate jurisdiction, but in Baltimore County, 45% of our children are on free and reduced meals. So we've made sure to give every child laptop technology. We're asking our 4th graders to start taking a foreign language so they can graduate fluent in that. We started early college high school where 9th graders within 4 years will not only get a high school diploma, but an associate's degree from our community college, all tuition free. I'm running with Valerie Urban, who's a former member of the Montgomery School Board and chair of the Montgomery County Council Board of Education Committee, because education will be our priority. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to change the format a little bit and have the lightning round. And instead of asking each person to respond to the question, I'm going to ask 3 questions, yes or no questions, and you're going to raise your hand if you agree. All right? Does everybody understand the rules? You raise your hand if you agree. Number 1, do you favor increasing the state minimum wage to $15 per hour by 2025? Not a lot of disagreement there. Number 2, 4 states have enacted paid family and medical leave. New York, for example, will provide 12 weeks leave for 2 parents or caregivers by 2021. Do you support paid family and medical leave in Maryland along the lines of the New York law? Raise your hand if you do. Still a lot of unanimity. And number 3, should the state require a minimum percentage of women employees for bidders on construction projects? Yes or no? Sorry. Should the state require a minimum percentage of women employees for bidders, that is, companies that bid on construction projects? Less certain there. A couple of people less certain. Okay. On to the more traditional format. So this is a 90-second answer, and we're talking about a subject I've been devoting a lot of my time to in the last couple of years, which is transportation. We'll start with Mr. Ross. According to U.S. News and World Report, Maryland is ranked 49th in average commute time, just ahead of New York. That's 49th worst. Governor Hogan has pitted road needs against public transit needs, eliminating Baltimore's Red Line and allocating reduced funding for the Purple Line. What do you consider the 3 top transportation needs that the state has to address? And briefly, how would you fund them? So the 3 top transportation needs for the state, and briefly how you would fund them. 90 seconds to respond, starting with Mr. Ross.
All right, I'll summarize my transportation policies as follows. Take Larry Hogan's transportation policies, flip them, and you've got mine. The exact opposite. I spent 13 years commuting on ARC between Baltimore and Washington. I know what it's like to have a soul-crushing commute. So priority number 1 is we do need to bring mass transit back to Baltimore. We need to bring the Red Line back. One of the largest predictors of poverty in greater Baltimore is commute time. There's one. Number 2, I think that we need to enhance the existing MARC lines, not maglev. Enhance the existing infrastructure between Washington to Aberdeen, out to Frederick, up to Baltimore, so we can dramatically decrease commute times and increase capacity. And number 3, I think we need to look at bus. We need to invest in bus rapid transit, where high-speed rail is not feasible or otherwise available. How do we pay for it? First of all budgets are really moral documents, and it would be a priority of mine to bring investments in Maryland's infrastructure from 20th century models into 21st century models. And the first way you would do that is by taking the gas tax that we put in place a few years ago that we said was going to go for mass transit, for public transit, and actually do that as opposed to rural roadways.
I spent 10 years as the founding chair of the Central Maryland Transportation Alliance, and we focused long and hard on transportation in Maryland, which, as I indicated earlier, I believe is a mess, congested mess. The first thing we need is a plan. We have no statewide transportation plan. That means when you build a piece of your transportation system, it doesn't connect up. We have way too many roads to nowheres, or as I like to say, roads halfway to nowhere. A complete statewide plan, which is what I have online, will enable the full state to assess and buy into and perhaps amend a full plan so that people in Salisbury will see that improvements in the greater Washington area are part of a plan that they'll benefit from too. So that's number 1. Number 2, we have to use the infrastructure that we've got to make much more reliable connections between Washington and Baltimore, much more dependable connections within those suburban areas. And we have, with the MARC lines, the Amtrak lines, and others, we have, in the metro, we have the infrastructure to do that. It needs to be remarkably improved. And the final thing is, I don't have a lot of time, we need to provide public transportation on the Eastern Shore, which has none, and we have to connect Western Maryland to the rest of the state through the Brunswick line. Funding. There are sources of revenue. The gas tax certainly is one, but also when you're creating transportation projects, they create a flow of revenue from which you can create investment pools to get the project started.
Now, you provided some statistics of what we suffer here in Maryland, but if you want to break it down to how we face this individually, each Marylander ends up spending about $1,500 in lost wages and wasted gas. This is an issue about the economy, it's an issue about the environment, knowing the transportation is now the greatest source of carbon. It's an issue of lifestyle. My husband, who's a CEO of the National Wildlife Federation, commutes down to Reston, Virginia, and depending on the route, it will take, or the time, it's from 45 minutes to about 2.5 hours. And that's why for me, it's a matter of first, public transit, I know this personally in the sense that when we first moved to Maryland and my father got a job as a teacher, we lived in the St. Agnes apartments. And so my father, because we didn't have a car, would walk to Route 40, hop on a bus, and it was that public transportation that allowed for a family of 4, instead of being on welfare, to have a single income. That is what public transit allows for people. It is a gateway of opportunity. And so I want to make sure that we guarantee things like designated metro funding, but we also resurrect programs that are no-brainers, like the red line, the purple line, making sure that the alignment is correct. But second, we need to recognize that we're operating in 2018, which means we need to institute smart solutions. How do we actually apply things like reversible lanes in areas that they could be used? How do we use things like better buses that actually rely on smartphones that are convenient, that are reliable? But I also want us to get where we need to go, which is electric cars, and I think we need to make investments to see if we can be a hub when it comes to autonomous cars.
Funding?
For all three of these?
Just briefly, where would you find the money?
Sure. My fundamental problem with how we apply funding priorities in Maryland is we have the 1950s budget. We spend twice as much on roads as we do on public transit. And so this is where Biden would say in our administration, if you want to know your priorities and your values, look at your budget. I would make sure that we fund, most importantly, the things that are actually used by the most voters.
Thank you. As somebody who's stuck in traffic, but also had to put up money for the purple line so that we could actually make sure it's built, because the governor reneged on us. The first thing to do, and I think folks have said it here, is you've got to bring back the red line. The two areas we need to invest in for transit in the state, the reason why we passed the gas tax, was to invest in the Washington region and the Baltimore region, and invest in mass transit there. And then use those investments in those areas to spur economic development, to use smart growth, which is what we did in the county. All of our development from county funds, married with state funds, were around places that had the infrastructure there around metros. The same thing in the Baltimore region. So as you grow those areas, you get more jobs in the state, you can invest more in roads and bridges throughout. The other thing is, for quality of life, we need to make sure there are places in Western Maryland and Eastern Shore that we need to make sure that we look at bringing the job centers there, so people aren't traveling on the roads to where the jobs are. The reason it's clogged up on 270 is people trying to get to where the jobs are. We need to look at innovative ways to have a place where people can work, live, and be entertained. That is something that we have to look at as a state, look at our policies there, and then you put the priority of the funding in there. So that's what I would do as governor.
But what kind of funding?
I think
Briefly.
what I would do with the funding of it is prioritize the money that we're getting in from the gas tax and transportation, and focus it on the mass transit of the Washington area and the Baltimore area.
Praying to get 90 seconds without being interrupted. So, first thing I would say is we need to make sure that we stop the fooling. The maglev, let's just name it. It's for rich people. You can't get up to 200 miles per hour and stop in between Baltimore and DC. And it would be $54 round trip. If you can afford $50 round trip, buy a helicopter. We don't need to subsidize it. What we need is a 21st century plan for our entire state. Yes, Baltimore and DC, but also the rural areas where young people get jobs and then can't get to them because public transportation doesn't work. What's in that plan? Yes, reviving the red line, upgrading the lavender line that we have now to the actual purple line that we wanted. Using bus rapid transit. Also, using smart technologies now almost entirely in the private sector and bringing them into public transportation. So things like metro access, you don't have to call 4:30 the day before to get somebody to come with a van, but you can go, we can actually use on-demand technologies. How do we pay for it? First of all, we've got to use the gas tax for what it was supposed to be used for, public transportation, and not for health. And second, we have to make sure that we shift our priorities. Susie's an urban planner. We gotta go back towards Plan Maryland and smart growth.
Well, running for governor, I can tell you that I fully appreciate the traffic problem we have in the state of Maryland because I've been in every traffic jam in the state. And I've been in the car so much, I think I'm getting bed sores. Listen, folks, Larry Hogan is the self-proclaimed king of highways. He's not candid with us. He pretends to claim that he's going to have a $9 billion investment on 495 and 270 and 295. I don't know what we're doing with the hospitals and the parks and the homes that are in the way there, but it's just not a realistic investment. And he's not being candid with us. This is the same fellow who cut the tolls because it tolled well, but what he really cut was $54 million a year out of the transportation budget, and we're still stuck in traffic. Instead of just solely relying on highways, we need to invest in 21st century mass transit solutions, and that means, again, recognizing that mass transit isn't just to ease traffic congestion, it also promotes economic development opportunities and jobs. And we need to, borrowing on what Jim Shea was saying, we need to connect counties. It would be great if we had mass transit solutions that reached into Howard County and to Frederick County that served Montgomery. It would be great, as opposed to doing a new span of the Bay Bridge, maybe we put a mass transit line there. These are the future.
Well, Bob, I think 6 months ago I would have answered this question first and foremost with dedicated funding for Ohio. But thanks to the work that I did and my colleagues in the General Assembly and our colleagues in the District of Virginia, we've moved forward with a $500 million plan in order to do that. Thanks to your reporting and keeping everyone honest about what you said.
Bills haven't been signed yet.
I think tomorrow at believe it or not, that's the sign. So you said that, when you put in Larry Hogan saying, Hogan to Bomata, drop dead, that got a lot of people's attention. Sure enough, it changed his perspective once again and got him on board with us. It's another example of why is he a popular governor? Because he's running on my record, not his record. Why do we have the ability to get things done in transportation? Because we fought hard to raise the gas tax. That's why we have revenue, so that we can do these things, and that's why he can sprinkle it all over the place. As governor, I would invest it in making sure Vermont is sustainable, making sure that the Baltimore transit system is sustainable, and quite frankly, an investment in Baltimore City. Because Baltimore City, believe it or not, is the only jurisdiction in this state that has no state roads. The city, one of the poorest jurisdictions in the state, with the oldest infrastructure, has to maintain all of it itself. We need to change that to stabilize and grow the city, because that's good for all of the taxpayers of the state. We need smart solutions in expanding bus rapid transit, marrying bus service to on-demand technology. But your applause, not my time.
Give him a little more time. You get more time for flattering the moderator. But what funding? Quickly, funding.
Because we have a robust gas tax that, in fact, is set to a percentage of gasoline. As gasoline goes up, our gas tax goes up. We fixed the situation that fundamentally we were facing for decades by moving forward with the tax plan I first put on the table in 2010.
Thank you. Okay, so moving along here, we're a little bit behind schedule, so I'm going to reduce the amount of time that was supposed to be allotted from 90 seconds to 60 seconds for the next two questions. So question 7, we'll start with Mr. Shea, right? This is about the plan to lure Amazon's second headquarters to White Flint in Montgomery County, which is the Washington Post has reported authoritatively that the site in Maryland that's being offered for Amazon's second headquarters is at White Flint.
Maryland is offering an estimated $8.5 billion worth of incentives to lure Amazon's second headquarters to Montgomery County. Would you have used the governor's budget and taxation to authority to provide these incentives? And what does that tell us about your approach to such incentives? And they have written in, do not skip this part of the answer. Would you include provisions for child care, pay equity, and diverse hiring to qualify for such incentives?
Well, I won't skip it, I'll start with that.
Okay.
Yes, sir, we do that, that makes a lot of sense. This Amazon headquarters thing is a really bad idea. Sure, if we could get 55,000 jobs and had the infrastructure to be able to handle it, all sounds really wonderful. But these financial incentives, $8.5 billion to the richest man in the world. We're getting held up by that.
Careful, that's my boss.
Oh. I don't hear anybody clapping. I don't hear anybody clapping yet. No, financial incentives, they can be used. I'm not completely and utterly against them, but you need to assess how much it's going to cost and what the benefit's going to be. I haven't seen any cost-benefit analysis on this project or any financial incentive used in the last 10 years. We also need, after the fact, to do a post-mortem and see whether we did get the benefit that we thought we would. These luring companies from other states provides 2% of your job growth. You, on economic development, you want to invest in Maryland, in our startups, in our small businesses. Better stop there.
Time's up.
So if I had supported the Amazon deal, I absolutely would include provisions, as you mentioned. But for me, it is a fundamental problem of, you see this announcement that Governor Hogan makes only a few weeks after our children were literally freezing in Baltimore classrooms because of the lack of investments in the basic things that we should be providing, which are education, investment in infrastructure. For me, it's a question of what are our priorities? And I realize that we have a fundamental issue. The fact that we are now gone down from 4 to 3 Fortune 500 companies reflects the dire straits that we are in. So I realize why Governor Hogan is trying to throw $8.5 billion, a few $billion more than the second most competitive bid. No one in an auction, if you were saying $100 is the next bid, would say, oh, I'm gonna give you $10,000. This is the insanity of our governor. And that's where we have to recognize that what he is trying to do is hoodwink this election and buy our voters.
In full disclosure, we did go after the Amazon deal with Prince George's County. And we did ask the state for money. We asked the state to put up about $4 billion to $5 billion, and we put up county incentive money. Because the idea was to create not just the Amazon jobs that would come here, it's the second headquarters, but actually to build around that and create jobs for the state and have additional revenue coming in. I think the reason that this gets so much attention is because you look at what the governor has done with what we call our economic development incentive funds. We use ours in Prince George's County to, the majority of the investment of that $50 million that we set aside went to small and medium-sized businesses that hire the most people. When you don't actually invest in those businesses during your 4 years as governor, the one time you step out there is for 2 projects, to think about it. One is Amazon, the other, near and dear to my heart, the FBI. But in between that, there was nothing that the governor's office was investing in, and that's why this seems so outrageous.
And it's the provisions for
Yes.
economic incentives, provisions for child care, pay equity, and diverse hiring.
And we actually did that in the projects that we funded, whether it's the MGM or the deal that we were working in terms of the FBI.
So to answer the question about the provisions, yes. I would go further and say that we need to have project labor agreements for anything this size. We've only had one in our state in the last decade. It was for the building of the youth prison. It's shameful. This is fundamentally bad negotiation. The 2 states that will benefit the most from the Amazon deals are the 2 that don't have to foot the bill. We put down $8.4 billion, DC and Virginia will be the ones who win. All the economists will tell you, there's no way to make this money back. Not making it back means you don't have money for the schools, for the kids who show up. And we all get stressed by that. What we need to be doing is to actually invest in keeping the startups that we have here. We lose around 90% of our tech startups in places like Baltimore Television. I invest in them. It breaks my heart every time they go. We got to play to our strengths, and we got to see that inclusion is one of our strengths. About 20% of our programmers are black here, as compared to 2% in the Valley. I'm bringing tech leaders here to look at expanding because they want to build a more inclusive workforce.
So a common theme that I want to express is that in order to beat Larry Hogan, we need a Democratic nominee who actually has a track record of experience and good ideas to bring statewide. Although I'm the Baltimore County executive, I actually chose not to submit a site for Amazon 2, even though I had spaces, of course, because I believe the best site would have been Baltimore City. That would have allowed the economic growth of the city to prosper and attract new investment there. Also the opportunity for mass transit. But what I've tried to do in Baltimore County is not write blank checks at big corporations and call that economic development. We're focusing on job skill training. We go to our large employers and we find out who are they hiring. And then we use our trade schools, our colleges, and even our high schools to train folks with the skills for the jobs that are out there. So they graduate not just with a diploma in their hand, but the opportunity for a job in their hand. We've been able to cut our unemployment rate in half by doing that.
Sitting here 2 blocks away from where Discovery is about to leave, we need to make sure we bring in new companies, new technology. Amazon is a game-changing investment for the entire region. As governor, I would work with the mayor of DC and the governor of Virginia to try to make sure it comes here, because it would be that important and transformative for our region for us to move away from reliance. We've been very fortunate to have the federal government here, and God knows hopefully Donald Trump is not going to relocate it somewhere else. But we need to make sure we diversify our economy. Amazon is an unusual and great opportunity. They only get that enormous amount of money in subsidies, the $5.5 billion in subsidies, if they spend $140 billion in our community over the next 35 years. They want to add as many people, the size of the workforce is 2/3 the size of the state government. This is a transformative investment for us in Maryland if we can secure it. This is the plan that Governor Hogan, County Executive laid out. I supported it because they said this is what was needed.
And the provisions on child care, pay equity, and diverse hiring, did you address them?
The nice part is we even passed legislation this year to try to bring in companies where we are putting those subsidies to make sure they are held accountable for labor agreements, like project labor agreements, and for those sorts of other public benefits that go on with those employers. And I think Amazon is a forward-thinking employer that would offer those sorts of things.
Mr. Rose.
I'll be pleased for all of us if Amazon does choose Maryland. I would have negotiated a very different deal than the one that Larry Hogan did. But as governor, my priority would be a little different. My running mate, standing in the back there, Julie Barati, after Julie left serving in government, she and her wife opened Denizens Brewing here in Silver Spring. It's a homegrown business now employing dozens of people. We make it too hard to own a small business and grow a small business in Maryland. 85% of the companies that come out of Johns Hopkins' basic research leave the state. So for the quadruple backflips that we do for Fortune 500s, trying to draw them into Maryland, my personal focus would be on trying to identify the Julie Baratis, trying to identify those promising companies inside the University of Maryland and inside Johns Hopkins University, and saying, how can we make Maryland the place that you grow and prosper? And yes to all the provisions.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm not writing a story about this forum, but if I were, I would be sure to point out that there was a significant difference of opinion regarding Amazon. One of the biggest ones I think we've seen this evening, just my observation. So moving on to question 8, we'll start with Ms. Vignaraja. This has to do with the juvenile justice system. Maryland's juvenile justice system has received very little attention in criminal justice reform discussions, yet Maryland continues to allow life sentences for juveniles, charge juveniles as adults, house juveniles in adult facilities, and place juveniles in solitary confinement. How would your administration address juvenile justice, and what policies do you commit to implement? And this was 60 seconds again.
This is an issue that I heard about day in and day out through both of my parents who were in Baltimore City Public Schools. And the way in which we throw the book at our juveniles, many of whom commit more minor transgressions and end up in extreme penalizations, is exactly the wrong direction of where I want to go. So the broader overarching point for me is, how do we stop this school to prison pipeline? Because that's where we know that there are programs like Operation Safe Kids, where you identify children who have had issues even before they enter the penal system. And we address the fact that we need to provide them with mentoring, summer enrichment programs, after-school programs. But once these children do go into the system, I want to, for example, end the idea that a juvenile can be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. It is nonsensical in a state like Maryland that is progressive to put in this assertion that there is no possibility of rehabilitation. So I want to make sure that we are providing those children with a chance, especially in our prisons where oftentimes they only get 0.001% of them get GED training. I want to make sure our penal system treats these children as human beings.
First of all, I'd like to associate myself with the remarks of my colleagues, especially at the sentencing our children to life in prison with no possibility of parole. One of the things I saw as a legislator is that too many times, especially for black and brown children, as a legislator of the judiciary, that we would wave those children up to adult system. That is just absolutely insane. You know, we're only hurting ourselves. As an executive, I see it firsthand. We have to invest in our public schools at the very beginning, both in terms of health, that's behavioral health, mental health, counseling, family, at that level. Then once they get, because I actually run a prison, I run a jail, once we have them in there, it's education, making sure they're not missing out on the education that they were getting in the public school while we have them there. And then once, if they are in our prison system, it's getting the training while we actually have them there. And so that is appointing a Secretary of Juvenile Justice that actually provides justice for those children, so when they return back to us, they have some skills and opportunities.
Problem working on these issues longer than anybody up here. I helped start the campaign to abolish the juvenile death penalty. We won. As the director of Amnesty International's U.S. Human Rights Program, I commissioned the first counting of juveniles sentenced to life without the possibility of parole in our country, because we weren't counting. To help build that movement. I also helped pass the Prison Rape Elimination Act. But first we had to push to get it renamed, because they wanted to call it the Prison Rape Reduction Act. As governor, you can expect me to be a champion for actually building a criminal justice system that works. I have a comprehensive plan for reforming our criminal justice our criminal justice system on our website. Part of that is to make sure that we stop being a state where consent is a defense when an officer rapes an inmate. And yes, that happens to children too. I'm also the only one up here with a plan to stop killings of unarmed civilians by cops.
I was a prosecutor in Baltimore City last century, and I'm the one who actually has worked hand in hand in the juvenile justice system. And I've evolved over the years. I've recognized that trying to treat the problem after the fact, we should be addressing the symptoms beforehand. So it's really trying to focus on education. We talked about how we need to bring pre-K to toddlers so that they can eliminate the achievement gap before it starts. We need more community schools which offer teachers the opportunity to make referrals for resources for children who are struggling. I'm not only talking the talk though, I'm walking the walk. In Baltimore County, I am funding an additional 108 positions in our public school system with an annual cost of $9 million for additional social workers, school psychologists, behavioral health interventionists. This is where we need to get to the problem before we get to juvenile justice.
I think probably the biggest problem facing the juvenile justice system right now is the systemic understaffing that Governor Hogan has allowed to occur, which has placed the young people we have in custody and the people who are working in the system at risk. At the Victor Cullen system, the Victor Cullen Center in Frederick County recently, several of the DGS staff members were injured when, more or less you could say, a riot broke out amongst the residents because they were understaffed. We have a governor who's more interested in public relations than he is on public policy and public services. We need to invest in having an adequate system to care for the young people who are responsible for it. Now, we also have to take firm steps to divert people from getting into the system, and we can do that through smart policies that provide after-school opportunities, year-round school opportunities, and in general, just a better public education system.
A consistent theme that I hope you'll observe is that if somebody is voting for Larry Hogan, he invests in them. If somebody is not voting for Larry Hogan, they withhold resources. Disproportionately low-income young people of color are not Republican voters. Therefore, they are being starved of resources to keep them out of the system. I taught kids when I was teaching in West Baltimore who were in and out of the system. I got to tell you, the lack of investment in counselors, psychologists, and social workers in our low-income communities has a direct impact on getting young people into the system. If we invest in counselors, psychologists, and social workers, we can keep people out of the system, and then once they're in the system, it has to be legitimately rehabilitative and not about penning people.
My running mate, Brandon Scott, is an expert in these issues. For the last year, he's been chair of the Public Safety Committee of the Baltimore City Council, and he's developed a very comprehensive public safety plan that focuses particularly on juvenile justice. I invite you to take a look at that as well. But as he says, and I fully agree, we look at this problem as an incarceration criminal justice issue. It's really a public health issue. You can identify the children who are at risk. You can identify the families that have children at risk. It requires focus. It requires programs that will intervene. It requires restorative justice. That's what we need, particularly for the juveniles. And the earlier we can identify the at-risk children, and they say, for example, if the children's not reading well by the 3rd grade, they're seriously at risk, we can focus on getting children on the right track before they're off the track. And then the very difficult job of getting them on the track while they're teenagers and later is something we need to take care of too.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're coming up to sort of the final lap here. We got, let's see, 3 more questions before we get to the 30-second wrap-ups. So question 9, and we'll starting with Rashawn Baker. Do you support legalizing the sale of recreational marijuana? If yes, how would you ensure meaningful access to the marijuana industry in communities that have been adversely affected by past drug policies? including people who have prior convictions and reinvesting revenue in those communities?
No, I don't at this time. I know that it's a trend moving across the country. I have supported, do support decriminalization. I think too many of our children are going to jail with a record because of that. But at this time, as somebody who's actually, watching what's going on in a large conflict government, I think we need to do more to look at this issue and study it that we have before we get the full-blown, recreational marijuana use. Its impact is not just on whether people can use it or not, but then what does that do in terms of health insurance, how do we look at it in terms of employment, all of those things that we're now starting to get some idea in terms of places that are doing it, whether it's California, or the District of Columbia, or Colorado. I think we need more time.
Well, this is a place of difference too. I believe we should just legalize it. And I'll tell you why. In the midst of 2 years ago this week, the second anniversary of the uprisings, I asked a member of BPD, retired, to go talk to the former commanders across the city, to the current commanders across the city. Said all of them agreed that they couldn't tell exactly why the violence was surging over the last 2 years, but in the last 10 years, half of the killings in the city were one group of marijuana dealers killing another group. There's a lot of violence in the trade because there's always a war over territory. And we can end that. And when we do, we can look forward to violence coming down in our cities and our state as it's come down in every state where they have passed laws to finally legalize cannabis. We also can build a more inclusive industry, more inclusive with ownership, talked about earlier, but also about workers. We need to actually make sure that we expunge the records of those who have been convicted of these crimes in the past, and that we include workers from the very neighborhoods where these drugs traditionally happen.
I don't have all the answers, and I think this is an opportunity where we need to listen and keep an open mind. This again is an evolving issue. I remember my former boss, Kurt Schmoke, the state's attorney, when he first became mayor of Baltimore, he publicly said that we need to decriminalize marijuana, and he got his head handed to him. And geez, he was making a good point. He was just ahead of his time. I think we need to, I'll tell you what just impacted me last week. I had a double shooting in Baltimore County, and I asked my police chief what it was about. He said it was a marijuana deal. I said, they're killing each other over marijuana? He says, yes. So it's really pushing me to start thinking about where we go as a state. Now on the other side, I've got 2 teenage sons, and I have to balance those questions with them. So I recognize alcohol is over 21, and there could be a way to rationalize this, but I think we need to look at other states that have legalized it and learn some lessons from them. And ultimately, if we do take this path, it becomes an opportunity for revenue that pays us for education, roads, and everything else.
I was proud to partner with Jamie Raskin on moving this debate forward, and it's one of the reasons why Jamie has endorsed me for this race. I am now the lead sponsor of the bill to actually provide for the legalization and taxation of marijuana for adult use in the state of Maryland. We have a plan set up which would then take the revenue that we would set at a 9% rate, just like alcohol taxes. We would take that revenue and reinvest it into the communities that have been hardest hit by the failed war on drugs. Sadly, marijuana is a gateway drug to the criminal justice system. It is what gets so many young, black and brown, especially males, engaged into the criminal justice system. Marijuana usage amongst whites and blacks in our society is the same. Yet arrest rates in Baltimore City for African American males 20 times higher than white males in the city. We have to get out of this cycle because what we're doing is not working, and I want to find a different way so that we can make progress.
I'm in favor of decriminalizing recreational marijuana use for adults, and we have a fully baked plan to do so on the Ross campaign. It'll bring the joint benefits, keeping people out of the criminal justice system, and taking $800 million that goes into the criminal trade right now and brings it above board and bringing over hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue into the state. I actually wasn't in favor this a year ago, I gotta be honest. I don't smoke weed. I've got a 15-year-old, 13-year-old, 11-year-old. I don't want them to smoke weed. It's bad for you. But then I dug into this with the faculty at Johns Hopkins University, and I learned what's even worse for you is dying in the criminal trade of it. What's worse is being an 18-year-old who gets caught with a dime bag and then basically is unemployable for the next 40 years. So yes, I'm strongly in favor of the decriminalization of adult use of recreational marijuana, but I don't want you to use it.
Excuse me, you said decriminalization, you mean it could still be a misdemeanor? Or
No, I want it to be legal.
You want to be fully legal?
Fully legal. Regulated, taxed, legal. And expunge the records of people who have past convictions for marijuana-related offenses that are nonviolent.
What we really need in this country are leaders, elected leaders, who are not afraid to be unelected. And the example of Kurt Schmoe is over this issue. I'm very much in favor of legalizing marijuana. Kurt got voted out of office for that. If that happens to me, fine, because it's the right thing to do. The marijuana trade, as we've already said, it's absolutely true, does a couple things. It creates profits for the criminal element. There are profits in this trade, and it goes to them. And there are plenty of disputes, as in Baltimore County and Baltimore City every day, over trading marijuana that turns into violence, that turns into criminal convictions, that puts young people on this roller coaster in and out of prison. So we do need to legalize it, we do need to regulate it, and we do need to tax it. The science and our history of use of marijuana is clear, and the medical profession can handle whatever adverse consequences will come, and there will be abuse just as there is with alcohol.
I agree with Jim on this issue because I do think that this is an issue that you see some of the most political pandering about. And it's a pretty recurring theme in a lot of my issues and positions I take, which is it's evidence-based decision-making for me. When you look at the fact that when it comes to, and my position is that I want to legalize marijuana, you realize that it is no worse than drinking. Second, that this war on drugs is creating a war in and of itself. And you are seeing evidence across the country of how it actually reduces the number of opioid deaths. At a time when in Maryland, we have seen 14 counties increase the number of deaths. And third, we've seen that it actually supports the economy. There is a reason why Colorado has the fastest growing economy. And so for me, it's about first recognizing that we do have to address the disparity in permits because right now it is not being equally provided to women and people of color. Second, I want to address the fact that we should not be criminalizing possession. And third, we do need to expunge records because it is a part of racial discrimination.
Okay, thank you. So now we're going to stop talking policy and talk about politics. So this question, which I think will be of great interest to this audience, this Democratic audience, is how are you going to beat Larry Hogan? That's the question. And you're going to get 90 seconds because this is such an important topic for Democrats this year, or most Democrats, I guess. Specifically, how will you win back the 100,000 voters that Democrats lost to Hogan in 2014 without losing any Democratic voters that supported Brown in that race? And I am instructed to ask you to be very, very specific. So please, how are you going to, what's your strategy? What makes you better suited than the others, respected people on the stage to beat Larry Hogan? And we start with Mr. Charles.
You know, we're going to win this campaign the way that I've won every major victory in my life is to build a bigger, more robust coalition. Most folks think it's possible. Look at the endorsements in this race. It's been endorsed, I think, about 85% of the unions, 90% of the major progressive groups, and all of the major environmental groups so far, including Bill McKibben himself. We now have more Maryland members of the groups that have endorsed than we'll need voters to win this primary, so we're working with all of them. Have you heard this? We're also, frankly, starting the way that we want to finish. Refuse to take money from big business. 99% of my contributions come from individuals. We have more Maryland donors than anybody else. More importantly, we have more low-dollar donors than every other campaign combined, including Larry Hogan. And that makes it possible for us to scale up against Larry Hogan very quickly. We've also been endorsed by Bernie Sanders, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris. That helps as well when you got to scale up quickly against in the phone. But the real superpower, if you will, for Susan Turnbull and I is both of us are very experienced at boosting turnout. When she was chair of the party in 2010, we turned out 125,000 more Democrats than we would in 2014. How'd she do it? She put 10 times more organizers on the ground. When I was running the NAACP in 2012, we were called the unsung heroes of Obama's re-election by Van Jones on CNN, because we ran the largest door-to-door voter registration operation in the country and turned out 1.2 million unlikely voters, setting records for black male voter turnout.
So folks, I'm not really known well in the DC area. That's because I spent my career in Baltimore region. And I have a great track record of real results there. We've done record investment in school construction with rising graduation rates and no disparity in graduation rates between black and white students. We've created jobs while cutting our unemployment rate in half. We've protected the environment, and we've done it all without raising the tax rates. So in my 16 years on the county council and 8 years as executive, we've never once raised the income tax rate or the property tax rate. So Larry Hogan is not going to be able to paint me as a tax and spend Democrat the way he did to Anthony Brown. But it's also important that we focus on the way we beat Larry Hogan. And that's not getting into a favorability contest, but talking about actually doing things again in Maryland. Because right now we're just standing still. We're not making the long-term investments that we need to make in this state, in education, in transportation, and in job creation. We've got a good record in Baltimore County in those areas, and we think we can deliver that for the rest of this state. So I'm going to get known here, and that's why I picked Valerie Urban, because she offers skill sets that I don't have. She's a woman, she's African American, she's from Montgomery County, but like me, she's a policy wonk who wants to get things done again. Baltimore County is the bellwether of the state. Larry Hogan got 55,000 of the 65,000 votes in Baltimore County alone. He's not going to be able to do that against me, my home county, because they know me. Thank you.
I'm going to beat Larry Hogan because no one in this race, or no one as an elected official, has stood up and fought Larry Hogan from day one like I have. The Baltimore Sun called me his #1 critic. Maryland Matters called me a one-man truth squad, because on the third day in office, when he tried to cut the public school budget by $1 billion, I stood up and said no and led the charge to stop it. When he tried to cut the funding for the healthcare exchanges, we stopped it. When he tried to throw pregnant women off of Medicaid, we stopped it. When he tried to cut the cancer research centers in our centers funding in half in our state, we stopped it. When he vetoed the 5-day sick leave bill, we overrode that veto. When he vetoed the renewable portfolio standard, we overrode that veto. We have overridden every one of his vetoes. We have, under my leadership in the General Assembly, we have pushed him to govern like a Democrat. That's why he's a popular person, because look what he's doing. Look at the bills he signed today. 4 nation-leading gun violence prevention measures. I can't wait to see what his base says as a result of that. We are going to win this election because when Democrats show up to vote, we cannot lose. Huge municipal victories in Frederick and in Annapolis because we organized and got people out. And we're going to do it because my campaign is focused on turnout and getting it done.
I like the lane that the Alec Ross, Julie Barati campaign is running in. It's modeled on a campaign I ran 10